Rush hour, 1970. A dock worker's wages vanish as Brooklyn's port loses nearly a third of its cargo, while subway riders wake to overnight fare hikes that force them to recalculate every dime. New York looked unbeatable, yet beneath that noise and ambition, the cracks were already spreading. How did daily survival here start feeling like a race against collapse? Before sunrise, Red Hook's waterfront comes alive with the shuffle of heavy boots on wet concrete. It's just after 4 in the morning, and a line of men gathers outside the hiring hall, each hoping his name will be called for a shift on the docks. Most have worked these piers since the days when ships stretched 3 deep along the wharves. Now, the crowd is thinner. Brooklyn's port has lost nearly 30% of its cargo in a few short years, and the work, once backbreaking and abundant, has become scarce and unpredictable. Inside the hall, the ritual is tense. Union stewards read out the day's list, and men with seniority nod, knowing they'll get a place. Others wait, silent, calculating the week's bills against the chances of another day without pay. On the pier, giant container cranes swing overhead, replacing the old gangs of men who once loaded crates by hand. The roar of engines drowns out the voices, and the pace feels mechanical and impersonal. Each container that lands on a truck means fewer hands needed, fewer families with steady income. For those who do get work, the hours are long and the pay barely stretches. A shift might run from dawn to late afternoon, unloading coffee or tobacco, always racing the clock. At the end of the day, the dock worker's paycheck is lighter than it was a decade before, even as groceries and rent climb higher. In the bars along Van Brunt Street, men nurse cheap beers and talk about the old days, about cousins who've left for New Jersey or Florida, about sons who don't want the work. The decline at the waterfront is more than numbers. It is felt in every muscle, every empty storefront, every family scraping by in the neighborhoods that once depended on these docks. On January 5, 1970, Midtown subway stations filled before dawn with the sound of hurried footsteps and the clatter of turnstiles. The fare had jumped overnight from 20 cents to 30 cents. For office workers, that dime meant more than a cup of coffee. Men in wrinkled shirts and women with sensible shoes lined up, clutching exact change, eyes flicking to the new fare signs taped above the booths. Some muttered about the cost, but most just squeezed forward, anxious not to miss the next train. On the platform, the air tasted of exhaust and damp wool. Trains screeched in, already packed. Elbows pressed against briefcases, and the morning paper became a shield. People wedged themselves into any gap, faces inches from strangers, the car swaying as it lurched north toward Grand Central or south to Wall Street. The heat inside built quickly, coats unbuttoned, windows fogged. Announcements crackled overhead, barely audible above the rattle and hum. Every minute counted. A delay meant risking a docked paycheck for being late. The new fare gnawed at weekly budgets, 60 cents a day, $3 a week, nearly $150 a year for a daily commuter. For some, that was groceries for the month or a week's rent in a walk-up on the East Side. Still, the city moved in waves, each person calculating what could be trimmed to cover the extra cost. By the time the train surfaced into the light near 59th Street, the rhythm of survival was set. Pay more, squeeze tighter, keep moving. No one expected relief. Just another day spent earning enough to ride again tomorrow. On Morris Avenue, the sun pressed in early, turning small bedrooms into ovens before breakfast. A mother sat at her kitchen table, sweat beading on her forehead, listening for the hum of the fan. Most days that July, the electricity flickered out by noon. Another brownout. She kept a bucket of water in the tub for flushing, just in case the outage lasted longer. Her youngest, barefoot and restless, begged to play outside, but the playground's metal slide burned to the touch. Older kids leaned on the fire escape, passing around cups of melted ice bought from the bodega downstairs. By afternoon, the apartment's walls radiated heat. Peeling paint curled above the stove, and the smell of hot tar from the street drifted in with every breeze. Dinner meant cold rice and beans, shared in the dim light of a battery-powered radio. When the power snapped back, sometimes hours later, her relief was quiet. A sigh, a rush to fill pitchers and charge the flashlight. Evenings brought neighbors to the stoop, sharing stories and complaints, fanning themselves with folded newspapers. Each day demanded patience, a kind of stubborn hope that the lights would hold through the night. On a Brooklyn block, stoops turn into living rooms as soon as the weather allows. Grandmothers fan themselves and swap gossip. Teenagers play cards or pass radios tuned to soul and salsa. And someone is always calling down from a window with a reminder or a warning. Vendors push carts stacked with fruit through the side streets, calling out prices in English and Spanish, weaving between double-parked cars and kids skipping rope. In Jackson Heights, Queens, the air fills with the sound of multiple languages and the scent of spices drifting from open storefronts. Indian grocers, Colombian bakeries, and Korean produce stands crowd the avenue, each with their own regulars. Shoppers haggle over fresh vegetables or linger at counters, exchanging news from home and tips for stretching a paycheck. Midtown Manhattan, just before noon, moves at a different speed. Office workers spill onto the sidewalks in waves, clutching sandwiches from corner delis or hot dogs from street carts. The lunch crowd flows between storefronts and subway grates, past newsstands stacked with the latest headlines. Taxi horns mix with the chatter, and every crosswalk feels like a starting line. Across all these boroughs, the city's rhythm pulses through its streets, sometimes chaotic, sometimes familiar, always stitched together by the daily routines that make New York feel like home, even when money is tight and the future uncertain. Factories that once anchored the city's neighborhoods stood quiet, their windows dark. Between 1969 and 1974, New York lost more than 500,000 manufacturing jobs, an exodus that rippled through families, corner stores, and entire blocks. For many, the paycheck that kept food on the table simply vanished. The city's unemployment rate pushed above 10%, and lines at welfare offices grew longer every month. On the streets, another set of numbers told a different story. In 1969, police recorded 681 murders across the 5 boroughs. By the middle of the decade, that number climbed past 1,600. Shootings, robberies, and assaults doubled in just a few years. Headlines tracked the body count. In living rooms and on stoops, the fear was personal. Parents warned children not to linger outside after dark, and neighbors learned to bolt their doors even in the heat of summer. The city's pulse was measured in losses, lost jobs, lost safety, lost faith that tomorrow would be easier. These were not distant statistics. They shaped every decision, every routine, every hope for a better year ahead. September 1970 brought a new kind of warning to Harlem. Along 125th Street, garbage climbed higher each day. Bags split open, newspapers curled in the wind, and the stench of rotting food drifted through the late summer air. City sanitation workers, locked in a dispute over wages and overtime, had slowed their routes to a crawl. Trash piled up to 10 feet high in some spots, swallowing curbs and blocking storefronts. Shopkeepers swept their own sidewalks, but the mountains only grew. Rats darted between bags, bold in daylight, while residents covered their faces and hurried by. For a week, the city's promise of basic order seemed to vanish. Health inspectors warned of disease, but the trucks came late, or not at all. On the radio, callers argued over blame. Some pointed to union demands, others to years of city neglect. In Harlem, the only certainty was the sight and smell of a city falling behind. The garbage piles weren't just a nuisance, they were a signal that something deeper was breaking down. For the people living and working on those blocks, the message was hard to ignore. Even the most basic services could slip away, leaving neighborhoods to fend for themselves. New York's resilience was forged in crisis and uncertainty, a lesson the city still carries. As urban challenges resurface nationwide, the stakes remain clear. The city will be thriving or unraveling, and that outcome depends on how we confront inequality and change. The city's story is not just history, it is a warning and a possibility. Thanks for watching.